I was, in my 30s with 2 kids and my wife's sitting there ready to divorce me. And I'm sitting there going, what the hell happened? Like, I don't even know why I don't have sex drive. Not once when I went to the doctor, not once when I went to the marriage counselor, not once when we almost sought out a divorce attorney was I ever told, go check your hormones, man. You're not the man your grandfather was. And that is a fact. Our testosterone levels as society has declined almost every decade over the last 60 years.
But why do you think that is, Josh?
You got to shock the body. You got to be doing squats. You got to be lifting weights, moving. And if you're not doing that, that's going to lead to likely, just lower testosterone levels in our society.
Does, getting on TRT means you have to stay on TRT?
We have guys that get on testosterone, they get their levels up and they get off of it.
Is there other ways to take it other than injections? Josh, super stoked to have you with us. We got connected through the internet, and I became pretty intrigued on basically my blood work. It had been, you kind of brought to life for me when we got connected that I hadn't had my blood work done in about a year. And I realized that was a deficiency, that I spent all this time training hard, but I'm like, dude, let's look underneath the hood. And so I got my blood work done, and so did Gabe. Full disclosure, I had a better optimization score than he did. But
someone's got to win.
Someone's got to win, but it's not, we all want to win. We all want to be optimized. And I think that's what this conversation is about. It's about, learning more about you. It's about learning more about optimization. It's about, being aware of what is medically available at this time and what men and women should be aware of in regards to blood work. I think that there's this stigma around certain things. There's this unknown around certain things. And we'd love to break those down today. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
I want to start here. Josh, if you could just tell us a little bit more about your background. I know that you had a successful career before founding Bloks, which is really the goal is to help optimize men's health, right? And can you kind of give us some background around your competitive background, your fitness background, like why you started Bloks, like kind of set the stage for us, and then we could dive into a lot of other things we want to discuss.
Yeah, totally. My background, personally, I'm father. 2 kiddos, 7 and my daughter's birthday today, actually, 7 and 4-year-old son, and been married for almost 10 years. Professionally, I've been in healthcare for almost 17 years now. So the better part of my career, our professional life, has always been in healthcare. I got my start with a big med device company called Stryker. So I was in their instruments and spine division. And then I was with them for about 5 years. I decided to leave and see if the grass was greener as an entrepreneur in healthcare. And I've done quite a bit owning and operating my own med device distributorship, owning and operating compounding pharmacies, diagnostic labs to include blood and urine drug screens. And then last venture before creating Bloks was owning and operating stem cell clinics, i.e. regenerative medicine. And as those were peaking, a big event happened to me and everybody else, and it was COVID. And it really shut us down from a regulatory standpoint because these were elective procedures. And our sweet spot, our demographic, was treating osteoarthritis. And if you know anything about OA, it really doesn't start creeping into your 50s and 60s. So those patients weren't leaving the house. They weren't spending money on elective procedures. And it was probably the best thing that happened to me because it set me on this warpath to fix my own stuff. And my wife was threatening to divorce me. I had my 2 kids at that time, and I lost my sex drive. I was about 55 pounds heavier, and I hadn't seen the inside of a gym for God knows how long. And as a former athlete, I played at a pretty high level of rugby, till I was about 28 years old. And for me, that was just such a massive change. But ultimately, it was my wife that was the catalyst to help me start looking at my health differently. And I went on this warpath to find, what we now call testosterone replacement, peptide therapy, all that stuff. And now we're here.
Man, I love that, Josh, just because thanks for sharing. But one of the things that we've just internally been talking about, something we really want to double down in this conversation, and hopefully some of the insights that you can bring would be a big part of that, is just really helping this like man that's lost his way. And I think that unfortunately there tends to be more of those than not, that go through a very similar arc, right? Like they were the guy, whether it was the athlete or just like the confident, whatever. And then something always tends to happen, right? Like whether it's like life, career, family, like change of seasons and not being able to adapt to those changes. And quickly, a week off turns into a month off, turns into a year off. Next thing you know, you blink and it's been 10 years and you've kind of made so much reverse progress, whatever you want to call that, and you have to find your way again. And I think that some of the things that we'll talk about is an obvious step in that direction. But I appreciate you sharing it exactly the way you shared it, because I think that a lot of men listening can relate to it in one way or the other.
Yeah, I've found just the best way to explain the creation of Bloks is just honesty. And there's a level of vulnerability that I had to suck up and just be like, yeah, man, I was a, former athlete, for lack of words, a meathead at one point, and I lost my sex drive. And, my testosterone levels prior to starting Bloks were in the low 200s, and I got them tested multiple times. But more importantly, it was not necessarily just a biomarker score. I had zero sex drive. I had, a ton of belly fat. I had no energy. Like I was that stereotypical low T guy walking around just without any direction in terms of my health, and didn't even care about it. So for me, I just, as a founder and somebody who's so passionate about what we do, I just want to level with guys and be like, hey, we're all going through this together. And, there's no better time than now to start prioritizing your health.
Josh, I have to ask, and I hate to I just want to ask, I wrote this down, 55 pounds of weight. You feel like you lost your way. You lost your sex drive. Like, can you tell me a little bit more about that? I don't know what that's, I haven't related to that before. I don't know what that feeling is, but like, does it come on slowly? Like the drive, and then what does that do in your relationship with your spouse? Again, I'm trying to better understand like what the man who's lost his way is going through, so we could better support, because I think at times, if you could just dive in a little bit more to that, I really appreciate like how it happens.
Yeah, well, most of the time it is something chronic. In my scenario, it was a chronic issue, and I'll back up, because there was some events in my life that were pretty traumatic, and my wife and I, when we got engaged, got married, we're like, we're gonna go have kids, and we had 4 miscarriages. And they were all pretty late term miscarriages. And the first one, as a man, I honestly, I was devastated. Everybody's like, oh, the woman is always impacted the most. But I pulled back in our marriage right away. I pulled back in terms of like not wanting to have other kids. And I think that made for this soup or this recipe of disaster in terms of like my health and prioritizing it. Because a lot of men don't know, when the woman is going through her pregnancy, the man's hormones change with her. We always see the guy get the dad bod and he starts packing on pounds, but there's an actual physical thing that's happening and preparing for the baby. Men's testosterone levels drop, their estrogen levels go up, their cortisol, their stress hormone goes up. There's even studies that show prolactin. It's a hormone for men that when the woman is conceiving, it says that he can become more, alert to be a better dad and listen when the baby's crying. But all that made for this recipe of disaster in just terms of my health. So it happened over a 4-year period for me. It happened, I pulled back from our marriage. I mean, I was, in my 30s with 2 kids, and my wife's sitting there ready to divorce me. And I'm sitting there going, what the hell happened? Like, I don't even know why I don't have a sex drive. We went and saw marriage counselors, talked about, every sexual position to try to entice it. And it was just confusing. And what was crazy about it, not once when I went to the doctor, not once when I went to the marriage counselor, not once when we almost sought out a divorce attorney, was I ever told, go check your hormones, man. Just go check them and see what's going on. And I went to multiple primary care docs, and they said, your testosterone's normal. That's why I have this hat that says fuck normal, because I was told I was normal and I didn't feel normal. And it's amazing that we live in this system where you would think as a man, you just catch on that. And I literally just buried it, kept going, kept grinding, kept working, kept doing my day to day. And I just forgot about prioritizing my health. And testosterone is one of those things that's very important.
Man, there's so many places that we can go from here. I'm curious, just because you mentioned going to the doctor and having those normal, can you walk us through like what normal, at least with testosterone starting there, actually looks like by like the medical definition? Like what are doctors using as their litmus for you come in, you do some blood work, they're telling you you're normal versus what maybe is optimal, what should be better than optimal? Like what are you guys then at Bloks working towards?
Well, the first thing we should establish, and one thing that we approach as a clinic, and I think the better people in the industry, approach it this way: you treat the symptom, not always the biomarker. And what I say by that is, I could come in and I could have a 300 nanogram per deciliter score, but I may feel great. There's no reason to start or onboard treatment for a patient unless there's something outside of the norm that patient's trying to achieve. But you treat the symptom, not the biomarker. I'll tell you, in general, the scale is pretty large. Most doctors call it primary care, internal med, and when you go to your standard LabCorp or Quest, their ranges are going to be somewhere between 250 nanograms per deciliter to 1,000, which is a big difference. I mean, you're talking 750 points, and if I was to compare it from just an overall perspective, it's like comparing a Ford to a Ferrari. The way we look at it, as long as the symptoms are there, we're not treating always the biomarker. Most guys live in a more optimal life from somewhere between 700 to 1,200 nanograms per deciliter.
We're specifically talking about testosterone right now.
Correct. You got it.
And is that free testosterone versus like...
Free is kind of a little bit different. I mean, you could talk to a lot of different clinicians who don't even analyze the free. Free is hard to adjust, so oftentimes you're just focused on the total testosterone, but we really focus on more of a total testosterone range. And then you can kind of peel the onion back if some things are off. For example, my brother-in-law, came in and had a pretty high total testosterone, 800, but had tons of different symptoms. And then you can peel the onion back and go, well, why is he still symptomatic? He has a pretty decent total testosterone. Then you can start looking at the free to try to adjust that. And that might, uncover some things that are happening in the body from there.
Why is it, Josh, that some guys, Gabe, I don't remember what your testosterone was at, but like mine was at like 550 and I feel really good. I don't know. I think one thing that I think is interesting about this podcast, and I want to ask you, is like, you don't know what you don't know. Like I'm at 550, but I've heard we've had other guys on the show who are like, dude, you got to be in the 900s, or you even just said 700, whatever. But like I feel good. So, but is it that I don't know how much better I could feel, or would I know? Would you know? Hey, something's wrong. Like in your case, you knew that something was kind of like adding up. You kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. I again come back to that. We treat the symptoms, not the biomarker. What we typically see is guys who come to us that are suffering from a symptomatic behavior, low energy, maybe not getting morning wood on a regular basis, brain fog, belly fat. Those guys, when we put them on a form of testosterone, that's the optimal range that we like to see them in. But keep in mind, they came in likely with a lower score. They also came in with a ton of symptoms. For you, Jason, on the other hand, you don't have any symptoms. Your testosterone range is fine. You're not suffering. You feel good. I mean, we could sit there and try to treat and diagnose, but if you're feeling good, your energy levels are good, your sex drive is there, your erection performance is fine, you don't have brain fog, you're in the gym a lot, which you're always in the gym. I mean, we wouldn't look to treat you with testosterone replacement.
I really appreciate that, Josh. And I think that that's something that I want to stay on a little bit more, because I know that a common critique of a lot of these brands that are coming out now, because there are a lot, is the fact that they're almost trying to get the majority of people that come in on something, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a business. You guys are trying to sell your services, make money, but there's a way, like you described it, which is, hey, if you come in and you're like, I feel good, sure, this number maybe isn't what we want to get other people to, but why fix it if it's not broken? So I think that that's important to stay on, because we had another guest on the podcast, because we have had guests that are like, man, like I'm on TRT and it's changed my life. Like I'm operating at like an amazing level, whatever. And we've had other guests that fall on the other side of the spectrum where they're like, too many people are getting on TRT. Like this thing is like, like we're having unrealistic levels of where people should be reaching. So I guess, how do you specifically address that critique? Even though I think you already kind of did it by, you guys are always looking at the symptoms first.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If it's not broke, don't fix it. I mean, if you're trying to optimize, if you're a biohacker, that's a completely different story. But I kind of sit on both sides of it. I mean, I can tell you our overall revenue split, less than 15% of it is tied to testosterone itself, testosterone replacement. So what we've done, and you're right, there is a business component to it. We've tried to build out an ecosystem to meet the consumer wherever they're at. I believe in labs. I think people, guys 30 years and older, should be getting at least 1 to 2 labs annually so they can measure that as they age. And then you can look at it, our whole suite of products, whether it's supplements or whether it's peptide therapy, whether it's testosterone replacement, Enclomiphene. There's a whole offering that we've tried to build an ecosystem around meeting the consumer where they're at. And maybe that's why we're not so, shove it down your throat that everybody needs to be on testosterone. What I do believe is that we live in a much different society than we did 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And we say this kind of joking a lot. You're not the man your grandfather was. And that is a fact. Our testosterone levels as society has declined almost every decade over the last 60 years. And the average man now compared to the average man, 60 years ago, we're seeing about, a 50% decline.
Why do you think that is, Josh? Like, I have assumptions, but what is why do you think that is?
I mean, I think the first thing is diet and lifestyle. I mean, our diets and our lifestyle, the mass production of processed, ultra processed foods are killing us. The amount of plastics that are in our system, the devices that we have next to us, the constant cortisol peaks, cortisol drops, with stress. Men are just working less and less, blue collar type hands-on jobs. Men are not working out as much. I mean, you're also seeing a correlation to men and dropping sperm levels and potency of those sperms. So it's a quagmire of a lot of different things. It's not one thing, but I think you can always look at diet, lifestyle, sleep, recovery, all those things. Are you lifting weights? Not a lot of people think just because I'm out here running and I'm running long distances, you got to shock the body. You got to be doing squats. You got to be lifting weights, moving. And if you're not doing that, that's going to lead to likely, just lower testosterone levels in our society. And the other thing, I mean, listen, we are metabolically unhealthy. Like our society is 70% is either overweight or obese. We are just starting on the wrong foot, so we got to start with the basics and then we can start addressing it from there. But the basics are pretty corrupt right now.
Josh, so if someone wanted to get their blood work done, Gabe, he's I think of him as like a really good runner. Gabe is like a really, really good runner. He's getting ready for a sub 2:30 marathon. And
wow. That's not true. Sub 3 hour marathon.
Either way, that's good, man.
So sub 3 hour marathon, but kind of giving him credit where credit's due is that his testosterone, his blood markers were really good. And I think maybe you could shine light on this. Maybe a factor of that is that he does do so much weight training, right? Because he's a advanced runner that runs a lot. And during that same time, he gets blood work and his markers look really good. So do you see people in the endurance space that come in and they have deficiencies somewhere? And if so, is weight training then solve that for them? I'm curious your thoughts of like what you've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, we see so many different types of avatars, and I can say call it our long distance runners, our guys that are really pushing it there, that are not doing weight training, typically have lower testosterone levels. And if I was to just say a number, it's for sure sub 400, and they're always baffled by that. So do I think adding some type of weightlifting regimen would help? I think it certainly would. Doing some type of pushing of weights, squats would certainly help. But a lot of those guys, that's not what they're built for. That's not what they're training for. So they avoid it. Obviously diet and lifestyle play a major role. Regardless of who you are you putting in whole foods? Are you putting in processed foods? And that's going to obviously play a role. Are you getting enough sleep? I mean, sleep is something that I believe in immensely, that is tied to healthy, optimized testosterone levels.
Yeah, sleep is huge. We've talked a lot about testosterone, but just taking a little bit of a step back, because the blood work that both me and Jason got done with Bloks was incredibly comprehensive, right? Like
Yep.
and I love the way the report was broken down and how everything was in sections. And obviously it gives you a score that Jason will never let me live down, that I think he took me by like a couple points. But can you talk a little bit about what men specifically should be looking for? Because we focused a lot on testosterone, but obviously there's a lot more in there. What are some of kind of like the red flags people should be looking for? And what do you guys focus on that's different and that you're not going to get if you're just getting your typical blood work physical with your doctor?
Yeah, I mean, our basic panel, and this is not what you guys did, but our basic panel that's, right now it's $75, comes with 44 different biomarkers. And for us, that the way we look at it, we call it the complete panel, because it's enough for us to look at a patient at that moment and make a medical decision to prescribe in some type of therapy. And some of the basics should always be included, like a CBC, a complete blood count, complete metabolic panel. Those aren't sexy, but that's going to tell you a lot about the health of a patient really, really quickly. And if you're a man, you should obviously be adding in something simple like a PSA, prostate specific antigen, because that's going to tell you a lot about where the prostate is. And then obviously those testosterone markers, those estradiol markers, progesterone markers, those are all very important to be looking just on an ongoing basis. Then you can start looking, at more, call it advanced markers, vitamin D, even though it sounds like it's not, but it is an advanced marker, C-reactive protein, ApoB, all these things that start looking at metabolic condition, start looking at, heart, start looking at inflammation. Those are all very valuable markers. But our theory is, my background being in the lab space, you've seen a massive turn and patients going through insurance and how they're actually approaching labs, and they call it reactive testing. So if I came in and I was given one marker or two markers, they're going to only test you further if something's off with those markers. And when we approach it, we want to look at everything that's going on, or as much as we can in the body, to make a really educational decision on what we're going to do with that patient.
Got it. I'm looking through my report. So you said that we didn't do the basic. What did we do?
You guys did the comprehensive.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
And the comprehensive one, Josh, it has everything, and the way you guys had it show up was great. One of the things I thought was most beneficial is that because I got my blood work a year before, I was able to compare where my numbers were. I think that's huge. And so, I had some recommendations based on my blood work, but I'm curious, obviously in the podcast show notes, we could add a link to your guys' website and what you guys have going on, because, you've also supported some of my friends here locally in the Bay Area. Yep. I think that every guy should just get blood work. I mean, we spend so much time talking about how you look and how you feel. And that's obviously very important. And I think it's a correlate. But dude, you never know, man. I mean, your blood work, and you know what I think it did for me, and maybe this happened for Gabe too, is like, it kind of like built my confidence a little bit more. It made me feel like what I was doing, it was like I'm still on the right path, so for anyone debating getting blood work, I think you should definitely pursue it, and at the level that Josh is talking about. So if someone wanted to go through your company or go through another company, whatever, what would be like a few blood markers that are like, I mean, I'm sure you could say, hey, all of them, but like, if you really had to say, like, if a guy's looking at it, like, which one's the one that just stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, CBC, CMP, those are basic, inexpensive markers, but it tells you a lot about the health of a patient. Obviously, get all your sexual hormones, because those are going to change and those are going to fluctuate. So estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, free testosterone, SHBG will come with that typically. I like to add vitamin D, because if your testosterone levels are off, your vitamin D levels are usually off, and that's something that you can easily supplement with over-the-counter medications. Obviously, the PSA you got to get, especially if you're 30 years or older. You want to start looking at that prostate, seeing how it's changing over time. One that we like to add in some scenarios, depending on the lifestyle, is cortisol. Where's your stress levels at? And then anything beyond that is just gravy, and really dialing in, the train and making sure you're really optimizing from there. But those are just basics that, for us, that we have in a panel that's, $75. So, and if you're not doing it through us, I don't care. go do it through somebody. Like, be doing this at least once a year. As you get older, as you get on therapies or consider getting on therapies, you'll get those more. But it's just a good way to look under the hood, whether it's proactive, whether it's preventative, because I cannot tell you how many times we've had patients come into us feeling off, and we've caught things at early stages, whether it's an autoimmune issue or in some instances cancer, and you can pick up in these basic markers those things really quickly.
Yeah, and I don't want to break up the conversation with a plug, but I know we also have a code for people to get 50% off that blood test. And like, when you say that basic test is 75 and they can then get it for what, 40, like, why wouldn't you do it?
It's actually 150. We're at 75
Got
now.
it,
So
got it.
yeah,
Okay,
but still, like, listen.
But still, like, why wouldn't you do it?
Totally. I mean, that's like me and my family going out to Chipotle anymore. So it's pretty inexpensive. I don't know why guys don't do it, man. I think what's great is, we talked about the competitive landscape. Like, we're finally starting to look at health differently. And I think as more competitors come in this space, it's justifying my decision to start this business. It's also amplifying why we started it. And the awareness and the education is becoming more abundantly clear of why doing this. And I think COVID helped expedite that. People are looking at their health differently. I think, whether you like them or not, this new administration with Robert F. Kennedy is going to open our eyes to a lot of things that's been happening with insurance, what's been happening with big foods. And then how are we reacting towards that with our health? So all this kind of stuff that's coming together in the last 3-4 years, I think is really good for us as men.
It definitely feels like there's a real opportunity for things to change, which is exciting. Let me ask you a question, Josh. I blanked on the question. I'll come back to it. Jay, if you had something, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask, so I agree. I think RFK coming in is going to be huge, but my question is more on vitamin D. So when I got my panel, I don't mind, we've shared this on the podcast, but the recommendations were basically to ramp up my vitamin D. And then they sent me a link to the growth hormone peptide, to something called VIP.
Yep.
And then
Enclomiphene.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I really want to kind of start with vitamin D, because that one was like a pretty clear, like, how many guys, when you get blood work done, how often are people deficient in vitamin D? And if so, is that the easiest thing ever just to start adding in?
Super easy. So what I can tell you is I've read clinical papers where they say society as a whole is somewhere around 60% deficient in vitamin D. What I feel we see as a clinic, and we have this data, is it's more than 80%. So it's a massive deficiency. And obviously sunlight is important, but we're not getting enough vitamin D and nutrients through our food. And it's oftentimes, if a guy's coming in and he has low testosterone, his vitamin D aligns with that.
And so, aside from the obvious, which is taking a vitamin D supplement, is the problem there? Do you think, yes, it's foods, but do you think it's just less exposure to being outdoors? Do you think it's just
100%,
like over thousands of years, right? Like we've
100%.
Okay. Got it.
Yep. Yeah. Like, I spent some time with Laird Hamilton, and we talked about vitamin D a lot. We talked about testosterone levels, and we talked about the foods that he eats. And guys like him, literally the first thing he does is he goes out in his patio and he stands in the sun with his shirt off and he stares at the sun. He literally stares at the sun. And that guy's a machine. So, like, we're just not getting the exposure that we have. I mean, some people are doing it. The biohackers are doing it. The Laird Hamiltons are doing it, but most men are not doing it. They're waking up, they're having their coffee, they're getting in the car, they're going right to their office, and they're coming right back home, having dinner and going to bed. That's a general lifestyle in America right now.
I remembered my question. When you mentioned that, why wouldn't guys do it? Do you feel that any part of that is like this, like male kind of like not wanting to know, not admitting that something's wrong, like not wanting to look under the hood? And then have you seen that at all? Because I know you guys actually have Bloks, but you also have Joy, which is your brand that does the same thing for women. Is there like more of an openness of, women trying to seek this information, or
100%.
what have you noticed?
It is a long distant country mile of how women are prioritizing their health over men. And I think I've analyzed this, I've read studies on this, and the only thing that I can extrapolate that makes the most sense to me is, as we are little men, little boys, we are told to rub dirt on it. It's okay, be tough. And I think that's how we started. That has sent a ripple effect as we've aged, to where, we talked about this earlier, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So all of a sudden, going and getting your blood done and taking a preventative and proactive, it's like, well, why would I do that? There's nothing wrong with me. So we as men have been conditioned since we were children to be the tougher one, to take care of your sister, to take care of your brother. And, if you get hurt, there's nothing wrong. Just deal with it and grind it out. I mean, I do that to my son today. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I should slow my roll, but I think that's the only psychoanalysis that I see of why we are positioned in our 30s and 40s and 50s to not, seek out this care. Women, on the other hand, they'll have coffee or a glass of wine with their girlfriends, and if one of them is feeling off, they all kind of kumbaya and they're trying to address the problems. The beautiful thing about our system is we've seen a massive aggregator of females pushing their men to get healthy. So it's worked out nicely, but women are far more responsive. They're far more active. And a fact that a study has proven that 80% of all household spending when it comes to health care is controlled by the female. So they're dominating us when it comes to getting healthy.
You talked a lot about the benefits, obviously, of getting on testosterone, specifically for men that, will have the symptoms and can benefit from that. But I'm assuming everything has its pros and cons, right? Like things that I've heard, and you hear so much, everyone on Instagram has an opinion about everything. But some things that you've heard is correlation with prostate cancer. Does, getting on TRT means you have to stay on TRT? Are you signing up for now, like, something that you're injecting or taking for life? Like, what's the truth based on what you've read there? Those two being like the two concerns that I've heard the most, maybe.
Yeah, there's a great study that came out not too long ago that talks about, men on testosterone, exogenous forms of it, and the consensus prior to this was it increases the likelihood of getting prostate cancer. It increases the likelihood of getting heart disease, and it's quite actually the opposite. What we have found is that low testosterone, and I'm talking naturally or exogenously, low testosterone leads to more of that. More low testosterone leads to more autoimmune issues, more cancer. So there's clinical representation behind that. My opinion is, with testosterone, again, we treat the symptom, not the biomarker. But in most cases, when it's done under a clinical supervision, meaning getting labs, seeing your doctor, doing it the right way, getting it from a compounding pharmacy, the results are usually pretty remarkable. And when you typically raise testosterone in men and women, most things always improve with that. So to me, there's little downside, but of course there is. To address the question on an exogenous form and being on it the rest of your life, that's a big one we get. We have guys that get on testosterone, they get their levels up and they get off of it. You can do that. The reason why most guys stay on it the rest of your life, because you're not bound to stay on it the rest of your life, is because they started at such a low level that they could never live in that optimal range that we discussed earlier, that 700 to 1200 without it. There's nothing that they could have done. For example, me, I was in my 200s. Now I'm, I range between 900 and 1100 nanograms per deciliter almost every time I get a lab. There was no way that I was going to get to that level unless I had some type of exogenous form. So for me, it's a choice, but there's no reason to get off it in most cases, but you can get off of it and your testosterone levels will rebound.
And Josh, just, while we're on this subject, is there other ways to take it other than injections? And is that the best way? Like, I feel like the technology is vastly moving on this particular subject. And I definitely want to talk about, Ozempic and where that plays and just a few other things. But while we're on the topic of TRT, what does the technology tell you now? Is it shots basically indefinitely, or can you do these like little capsules underneath your tongue, or what's going on there?
All the above. So there are a handful of forms. You have pellets, which is something that we don't do, where they're inserting a pellet right in your your cheek. You have oral forms, which is typically a troche will dissolve underneath your tongue. You have cream form and injectable form. Most guys that we treat are using a subcutaneous injection. So this is a very small insulin syringe. They're grabbing a piece of belly fat and they're doing it twice weekly, so that you're not getting much variation. Your highs are typically pretty level. Where the cream, we see some fall off. The troches, like, guys don't typically do as well with those, but there's multiple forms. There's now a couple FDA approved forms that are oral, that a lot of guys are liking, that we offer through a company called Kaiser Trax. But a lot of guys seem to really prefer just the subcutaneous twice weekly injection.
Okay. And then, while I'm asking about it, what would be the difference to the Sermorelin or the Enclomiphene? Would you recommend to go Enclomiphene before doing like an injection? Because that just boosts your testosterone, right? Like, do people normally start there and then get on to like injectables, or am I tripping?
No, you're completely on point. So Enclomiphene is called a SERM. It's a selective estrogen receptor modulator. So what it's doing in a very high level, it's tricking the brain, estrogen, to produce more testosterone. And it's the way you can think about it is it's like, let's say your car you left your car lights on, and the battery, you left it overnight. You're basically jump starting your testosterone levels. And a lot of guys are great candidates for that. It's called secondary hypogonadism. Low T is hypogonadism. This is a massive thing that's starting to happen right now. More and more guys are falling into this category. They're symptomatic, but maybe they're not sub 300 nanograms per deciliter. So, Enclomiphene is a great start. It's an oral capsule that you can take, and the benefits of it are, most guys are 2 to 3 times timesing their baseline levels. You run no risk or major concern with fertility issues, and you don't have any testicular atrophy. So a lot of guys 50 and younger are coming in, and their levels are in that kind of in between range, and Enclomiphene is usually a great stepping stone to jumpstart that testosterone. The other thing, we see guys get off of it once they get there, and in some cases they maintain it and some they don't, but most of the times they're getting, when they get off, their baseline levels have improved.
Jason mentioned this. I definitely want to talk about GLP-1 medications and kind of where that falls into everything you guys do, and also get your opinion on how that piece of the puzzle fits into, reversing all these trends that we see. Obviously there's like two sides to every debate. Like here you see the like, hey, a drug shouldn't be the solution to weight loss. Like it's just an easy, is that really the route we want to go? And then, on the other side, it's like, hey, this is a very useful tool for people that have tried everything and just can't get going, take that first like 2 steps to actually seeing the weight loss. And if they do get that first bit of weight loss, that puts them in a better position to just feel healthier and actually go from there. And it's interesting, like you mentioned, RF Kennedy too. I was reading an article the other day about how, one of the things that they want to do is start to subsidize some of these drugs at like a federal level. And then the article was more about like, how does that fit into, reducing government spending and so on and so forth. But RFK actually, or at least in the article, has the stance of like, he rather subsidize gym memberships and stuff like that. So kind of where do you fall on that spectrum, and how does Bloks specifically, approach this?
Yeah. I mean, when diet and lifestyle have failed, and you've crossed that threshold of being metabolically unhealthy, and let's just say 27 BMI or higher, typically, it's a phenomenal therapy. It is a phenomenal therapy. And what I like to say about what we do is we provide momentum to your health. We jumpstart it. We give you a head start to get there quicker, but you still got to do the basics. You still got to focus on lifestyle. You still got to focus on diet. You can literally get on semaglutide. You can get on tirzepatide, which is the GLP category, the Ozempics and the Mounjaros and the Zepbounds of the world. You can out eat it. Or you can take that and you can control your cravings and start making better habits and stacking those habits. So I think the there's so much noise in this space, but you have to acknowledge the problem that we face. We talked about it earlier. Over 70% of the country is metabolically unhealthy. What do we do? Do we just tell them to go to the gym? Do we just tell them to eat healthier? I mean, these are people who have suffered from, food issues for years. This is a chronic condition. This is a great tool or device or drug or therapy that gives you that momentum to start making better decisions. So when it's done right, when it's paired with an exercise plan, when it's paired with a lifestyle and diet plan, it can be extremely effective. And we have an army of people who have lost so much weight and have literally regained their life back. So I'm a big proponent of it when it's done right, but I don't think it should be used for vanity. And I think that's where you cross the line. And I think there's a fine argument to talk about it in child obesity, but we have to start addressing the issue. The issue is we are chronically unhealthy, and it's not just going to be a diet. It's not going to be a gym membership. These people, those receptors have changed. They're dormant. They're no longer there. So we have to address it right away, but we also have to address the root cause, and that's diet, lifestyle, exercise, all those good things.
At a high level, what are these therapies doing? How are they working?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. It's slowing the digestive tract to, reduce cravings. And it's pretty effective. I've taken them, and there's really two classes. You have semaglutide, which is a GLP-1 agonist, and then you have the tirzepatide category, which is two agonists into one, and both of them have the same effects. Tirzepatide has been shown to be more effective when it comes to weight loss with less side effects, because sometimes a lot of patients will experience nausea or acid reflux, and that's because it's slowing down that digestive tract. So you got to eat healthy. You don't want to drink on it, but that's the essential mechanics of what's happening.
Got it. And then when you guys are using that to, like you said, spark momentum, get people going, is there like a clear, like, we're going to do this for this amount of time or until we reach this body fat percentage? Like, how are you guys distinguishing when, hey, this was a good momentum starter versus like, all right, you should have built the habits, you got to go the rest of the way on your own? Or does that depend person to person?
It varies so much. I mean, we'll take patients who are 27 BMI and just need that nudge, and can set some healthy lifestyles and habits, and can get off of it. We've treated patients who are 30 plus BMI who might need to be on it the rest of their life, quite frankly. So everybody's different, but I can tell you, if you're doing the basics paired with this, it's a great stepping stone to just living healthier. And we know that obesity leads to type 2 diabetes, which leads to heart disease, which leads to cancer. So, we know we're doing the right thing by pairing it with exercise, lifestyle. Every one of our GLP-1 patients are assigned a coach to not only to hold them accountable, but to talk through those diet and lifestyle tips, and then paired with the medication.
Yeah, I think my perspective on this maybe is evolving over time. Gabe, I don't know about yours, but like we've talked about this quite a few times, and I think that, I don't know, man. Maybe it's just an example, like I was talking to you about earlier, Josh, like just not being able to relate. I couldn't relate to what you were saying about those struggles you had about low testosterone. I also can't relate to the person that has their BMI super high and literally just like, bro, I get it. I know to eat healthy. I know to work out. I can't get there. And this could be that jump starter they need. I think my perspective on it's kind of evolving over time, but I think it's something we're going to have to address. And then, not to mention, what are you seeing in regards to like third party of these, like almost like street drugs? Like, are you seeing that happening where people are not getting them through a doctor and they're just getting them through their friends?
Yeah. I mean, I have seen, I have personally been reached out to as the Bloks founder from God knows who, China. I mean, it's literally groups in China that are making this in bulk and sending it. So there has been a black market that has popped up in this space, and that's the last place you want to start. So I'll give you the landscape. There are two major companies that are the FDA approved version. Novo Nordisk, which is call it the owner of the semaglutide pathway. So you got Wegovy and Ozempic. Obviously, everybody knows Ozempic, and that is really what put this on the map. And then you have tirzepatide, which is an Eli Lilly company, and you have Zepbound and Mounjaro. So both of these companies are really kind of owning the space. What happened was in the last, call it 3 years, there's so much demand behind this product. There's so much metabolic issues that we are needing to address that both of these FDA approved categories went on shortage. So it allowed compounding pharmacies throughout the country, and these are very regulated US based compounding pharmacies. When an FDA approved drug goes into shortage, they are able to compound a similar like version. So you've seen that layer pop up. But then in addition to your question, you've seen, because the market is so big, the money is so big. I mean, these are they're saying that these are going to make, Lilly and Novo potentially $1 trillion companies. That's how big this market is. But because of that, anytime a big market explodes and there's a cash grab, you're going to see the black market jump up. So that's the last place you want to start. There are multiple options now for patients, whether it's the FDA approved version or the compounded version, at least as the shortage is still here.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about this on the podcast, and similar to you, Jay, I think my opinion definitely is evolving, but it's still concerning because that not everyone out there is approaching this the way that you guys are, like accompanying a coach and holding them accountable and trying to build the habits. And unfortunately, when the incentives are on a quick fix, it is a little concerning. Like, it starts being concerning when they're talking about, getting kids on this. Like, at what age can we still solely focus on the habits and still reverse some things without inserting something that I don't want to call it a shortcut, but could be seen as a shortcut when you're talking about kids and stuff like that. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's so hard. Like, listen, I'm a father too, so like I take this pretty seriously, and I'm very fortunate that my wife and I have chosen to live, well, at least now. I wasn't in this position at one point, to live very healthy lifestyles. And my wife she's an organic snob. Anything that's coming in is whole food. Anything that's coming in is organic. So we're very fortunate that our kids are going to grow up in this environment. And our kids are, creatures of that environment. On the other hand, I have, distant family members who don't have a single whole food in their house. The parents are eating McDonald's, 3-4 times, maybe more a week. And their kids are growing up in this disastrous environment. And that is going to lead to obesity. That is going to lead to type 2 diabetes. I'm not saying that Ozempic or any of these drugs is the solution, but we have to start figuring out the environment and where these people are coming from. Because just like any athlete, if you grow up in an athletic family and you're constantly encouraged to work out, you're likely going to be a better athlete than the family that doesn't do that. And so much of your environment as a child is dictated by your parents. I'm so indifferent on this subject matter because some kids are growing up with a very fixed deck, and on one hand, there's kids that are growing up with a good fixed deck, and there's the other hand where they're not. So we got to address it in the schools. We got to address it with teachers if it's not happening at home. But even my kids, lunch. I went to their cafeteria recently, and you got to start having better foods in our school system too.
Yeah, from a policy perspective, it's such a mess. I remember reading, I'm sure you're familiar with this, they had a rule in there that like there needs to be a vegetable in these school lunches, but they petitioned for the tomato sauce to count as a vegetable, so pizza checks off the box. Which is like, you tell anybody that and you're like, who's agreeing that this is like okay to do? But it is, it's the law, it's the regulation. It's crazy.
It's crazy. I mean, it's like the food pyramid, that came out from our government. It's like, did they just throw shit at the wall and just think it would stick? I mean, what's going on here? I mean, I can tell you, we eat very healthy, very good food in our household, and our kids are going to be fortunate because of that. But there's a lot of kids that just don't grow up in that. And going to even my kids' school, and they go to a private school. I was kind of astounded with what was on their plate.
Josh,
yeah, and Sorry, Jay. And just another piece of the solution that I think we can do a better job being in the fitness space and putting out information is I feel like a lot of people unfortunately think that they've tried everything from a lifestyle perspective and it's failed them, but it's just because they've had the wrong information. And that to me is like one of the most tragic things, right? Someone that's tried everything, but they're like,
Totally.
hey, just doing all this cardio is going to help. And
Yeah.
eating these quote unquote healthy foods, which ends up being like yogurt packed with sugar or, a protein bar that's really a candy bar. Like I'm doing all the
Yep.
right things and they genuinely think they are, but they've just been lied to by a lot of companies that, the marketing ends up being doing more harm than good. So that's really unfortunate because they'll come to a place where, okay, this might be the only solution, but they were disciplined and everything to do the right things. They just didn't have the right information. And I don't know how you solve that. It's a pretty big problem because these companies have a lot of marketing dollars, but
yeah, I mean, it's gonna have to come from the top down. I mean, we talked about RFK, and we got to start with our foods. I mean, it makes zero sense why you can cross an imaginary border from US to Canada and Fruit Loops in the United States is different than Fruit Loops in Canada. Like, I mean, the amount of dyes, the amount of chemicals that are added to it, and that is in every single food that we have. And I don't know where the corruption started. I don't know where the lobbying started. I mean, I know it happened with processed foods, and I know big tobacco companies got into owning and operating large food corporations because, well, what's really really addicting is sugar. I mean, if you're going to go from nicotine to something, well, the next best thing might just be sugar. So you saw a mass exodus to that, and I think it's going to have to come from the top down, and there's also just going to have to be a sense of accountability amongst parents to do better for their kids too.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of switch gears just briefly to peptides. If you could just describe to me, so we've talked about testosterone, TRT. How about peptides? Like the Wolverine juice, it was FDA approved. Now it's not BP 157 or whatever
APC.
It is. Yeah. And then, so what is a peptide? And where do you see that going? And then how does that relate to stem cells? Like there's a whole new category, right? You have all these new things. And I think just making people aware of them, I think is really important.
Yep. So peptides flowing through our body naturally, we have somewhere around 7,000 peptides going in our body right now. When you think about a peptide in terms of what we look at, there's short chains of amino acids, there's stepping stones to proteins. The people don't realize, but the most common peptide in the world is insulin. It's been around for years. Type 2 diabetics, type 1 diabetics need it. Our bodies need insulin regardless of who you are. Been in, the marketplace for a long time. We have, I think, close to 60, 70 peptides that are FDA approved. Lots of really good things behind peptides. I look at your hormones as like the foundation of the house, and I look at peptides as your kitchen, your bathrooms, your master bedroom, all the things that really can dial in the rest of the body. And for us, we look at it in a complete lens. I mean, Semorlin is a growth hormone secretagogue, great peptide, low risk, high reward. Most people are walking around with deficient growth hormones, so it's a great way to stimulate the body's natural production. We're not shutting it down with a peptide; we're stimulating the body's natural production. You mentioned one like BPC 157, the Wolverine stack. So it was never actually FDA approved. It was just a compound that people came up with that is a phenomenal peptide for recovery and healing and inflammation. And, I won't get into the conspiracy theories, but there's a lot of market demand for that. And why? Because it works, number one. And two, it's not that expensive in the grander scheme of it. But it got pushed out about 2 years ago, and then you started seeing it trickle away. But as soon as basically a lot of these peptides came off the compounded list, because these were all compounds, you saw major FDA companies file patents for these peptides.
And are these on banned substance lists in sports?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So anything that we're pretty much doing it from a professional athlete perspective is a banned substance. I mean, these would be considered performance enhancing, mechanisms. Now, I think there's a lot of things that are on the banned substance list that shouldn't be, but these substances, these hormones and peptides, these are absolute performance enhancing mechanisms for an athlete.
So I want to talk about that a little bit, because why is it that some of them are in the banned substance list if these are things that can just make people feel better? Like, who's drawing the line of like supplements that are legal versus just these things that could help with the recovery? I remember just listening on a podcast where Rogan was with Derek for More Plates, More Dates about like,
Yep.
Why wouldn't you allow MMA fighters to take this thing that's just going to protect them more? Like it sounds like it should be mandatory for them to take it. Why do you think that is?
Politics, lack of education, years of misconception, misperceptions, not understanding what these actually can do for, let's not even talk about now, but let's talk about longevity. Let's talk about health span, what these athletes are putting their bodies through to set themselves up for their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Look at football players with CTE. I mean, I'm in the camp that I think there's a strong argument to be said that if there's a way to do it where it's controlled and it's under medical supervision, I think it's really good for the athlete. But that's a whole other thesis, a whole other topic to try to figure out and conquer. But I don't know if we'll ever get there. But I really think if you look at the recovery, the inflammation, the long-term benefits for athletes, I think there's a really strong argument to be made that some of these should be on there, or some of these should be accessible to athletes.
I want to go ahead, Gabe. If you had something about the athletes, I had a kind of a different path real quick.
Well, do you think that plays into the stigma of some of this stuff?
Absolutely.
Because
yeah.
I mean, I'll be perfectly honest with you, right? Like, I have this like 3-hour marathon goal, and I would feel, and my opinion on this is definitely evolving a little bit, I would feel as if I like cheated to accomplish that if I was doing some of these things. Like, it would feel like I had help aside from just my training and doing the work. And I'm not going to win anything. There's no money here. I'm not a professional athlete. It's just this like little goal that I have that is a big deal to me, that I would definitely feel was less so if I had the help of anything that was on a banned substance list. And again, it's just because it's on this list. What's your kind of advice for getting over that stigma, or just like, combating that? Because I do know it's very real. Like I feel it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that you can't be half pregnant on. Like you're either you're in the camp of like, hey, I'm natty and that's my thing, and this is how I'm going to do it. And from like a regulatory standpoint, you can't be that way either. You either you have it banned in sports entirely, or you don't at all. It's not like some sports do it, some don't. But I will tell you, I don't disagree with your philosophy. If I had that option, I'm 42 years old, to not get on testosterone, I wouldn't have got on it. But I was like sitting there with no choice. So somebody like you, who's maintained a pretty healthy lifestyle, a very healthy lifestyle, I would take pride in that. I would take pride in the fact that you can have that outlook. For me, it was really like this was my only choice to start feeling better. So I think everybody's perspective should be, respected. And I'm a big believer on, people having a choice in the matter, one way or another. Now, professional athlete, that's a completely different thing. Like, you got to either be, as is, or, allow it.
But I guess the question there is, am I, using me as an example again, like, am I missing out on something that could just extend the amount of time that I can run because I really enjoy it, not have it diminish other areas by not optimizing these things? Or again, does that just come down to like just a personal decision? Like, what would you say to me, I guess?
I would tell you, just like I would tell my best friend, I would say, dude, if you feel good, if your symptoms are good, don't change it. There's no need to. I mean, honestly, like I think, fast forward a year down the road and you come to me, you're like, Josh, man, I'm struggling to get out the door. I don't know what happened. My runs have tanked. I don't even want to get on on a treadmill. Then it's like, hey, let's circle back. Let's look at the biomarkers. Some symptoms are starting to prevail. then we look at treating it. But if you feel good, I mean, listen, feeling good is hard to find, and most people aren't in your guys' situation or boat. And that's fortunate for us because we have a lot of people to treat. But I'm a big believer on if you're feeling good, stay in that position. Don't change anything.
I love it. Love it.
Dude, that's such great advice, Josh. I
Yeah.
was telling Gabe on the show, your guy, because after I got blood work, then you sit down, you have like a meeting with your team, and they go over a few things, and they're like, "Look, dude, how do you feel?" I'm like, "Dude, I feel pretty damn good." So Gabe and I were having a conversation. I just said, like, I don't feel like I have the right to go take any of these things until I could first prove to myself that like my nutrition's cleaned up, my sleep, like I sleep well, I train hard, I do everything, but my nutrition could probably be refined for sure. So I told Gabe, I was like, dude, before I even want to look into any of these things, let me see what I could do personally to get to like the highest level. And if I still continue to feel even good, then I don't need any of these other things, right? But I think taking ownership of like, hey, how's your training? How's this? How's that? Then if you still feel like shit, dude, a guy like you're there to support them. And I think that your outlook on it is really powerful. I've enjoyed this conversation because, you have a vested interest in men not feeling well so they can go and get on your products. But I feel like at least the sense I'm getting is like, dude, you just want everybody to feel great. And if they feel great naturally, that's even better. But it just so happens that a lot of guys, like in your case, you needed something to jumpstart that and or maintain you. So it makes total sense to me.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. And like I said, I mean, our goal is to meet a consumer or a patient where they're at. And at minimum, I will go to my deathbed. Guys should be getting their labs at least once to twice a year. And that's the foundation of making good decisions as you age, good decisions now, preventatively, proactively. And I think if we can at least be a catalyst for guys to own that part of their journey in health, then we're doing the right thing.
Man. Well, on that note, Josh, we will put in the podcast show notes. I believe it's Gabe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's using code JK Podcast, right, for 50% off. I mean, dude, so these guys who are listening to this podcast can get their blood work done for $75. Is that how much it's going to be?
Yep. Dude. 45 biomarkers, $75.
Like, why would you not do that? And then, I went to like a local spot right by my house called LabCore or whatever. Super cheap. It was or super easy to get to. $75. That's awesome. So we'll make sure to put that in the podcast show notes. And if nothing else, a year from now, when you're listening to this podcast, at least you can say, hey, let me go back and look at my other markers. Let me redo this again. And you can start comparing and contrasting. I know for Gabe and I, that's huge for us, is that now we have these benchmarks. And the earlier you start with those benchmarks, the better data you could have for the rest of your life. So Josh, I really appreciate your time, man. Your background's really interesting to me. I love the fact that kind of just, you even said like COVID just like worked out for you. I mean, I think for some people, they learned a lot, that adversity. Sounds like you just jump-started something really special for you. So I'm glad you and your wife are doing well. I'm glad your kids are kicking ass. And we appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's been an honor.
Well, on that note, ladies, gentlemen, we really appreciate you guys for checking out the podcast. Make sure to go back, check out all the other incredible guest episodes. Go check out the other episodes with Gabe, Giannis, and I, as well as Dennis and MDV. We have a few of those that just came out. They're badass. Go check those out. Leave the show a rating, a review. And as per usual, keep training hard. Let's go.